Ayan na mga kameta! Kamusta kayo dyan? Yan, medyo good news naman yata tayo today Finally, medyo maaga pa ng taon, meron na tayong mga good news. Of course, greetings naman dyan sa mga ating mga ka-unity all around the world. Malapit na ma-circumnavigate po ang mundo ng inyong paboritong presidente, di ba? Mamaya na tayo dun sa Magellan Jr. ulit, yung mga latest updates sa Davos Summit sa Switzerland, among others. Of course, yun yung focus natin, presyo ng sibuyas. Tapos kahapon, pinag-usapan natin, of course, si Senator Tulfo and prospects for the 2028 elections. Today naman, mga kameta, of course, kailangan natin pag-usapan itong big news of the day. Boom! Booyaka siya! Kamusta na dyan, mga Tatay left the chat room. Ayan. Dami na trigger dyan. Doon sa sinabi. Hindi, kamusta na dyan? Kamusta na dyan, mga natin, mga tatay, katatay na talagang desidido na tama sila, na talagang sa kanila yung punto ng hustisya, blah blah blah. Okay, so today guys, it's formal. Na-quit na po si Ressa, ang CEO po at founder ng Rappler News Agency, dun sa charges of tax evasion na sinampa sa kanya sa ilalim ng dating administration. So this decision was handed by the Courts of Appeals, which deals with the specific cases of taxes. Pag-usapan natin ng mabuti yan, mga kameta. But clearly, there is a whiff of change. At least may konting mga indications that perhaps things are really moving in the right directions as far as our democracy is concerned, as far as freedom of expression is concerned. By the way, of course, this is not the end of the story. There are still other cases that Maria Ressa has to deal with, in fact, even more serious cases. But the hope is that things have now been set in the right direction, that things are set in a certain kind of motion that will, in the hopes of many people, will lead to the acquittal of Maria Ressa on other charges also filed against her by the previous administration. But many are also saying, what about some other important figures who also fought against the excesses of the previous administration? At of course, kasama dyan ang dating Senator Laila de Lima, also the former chief of the Commission of Human Rights of the Philippines, among if not the fiercest critic of former President Rodrigo Duterte. So ang tanong din ngayon is what will happen naman kay De Lima, Senator De Lima. Is Senator De Lima the next when it comes to acquittal? When it comes to making sure na truth speaks, that justice prevails, and that yung mga kaewanan, mga fake cases, mga politically motivated charges, mga yan, will hopefully eventually be discarded. Now, let me, before going to the case of Maria Ressa and talking about the other cases also against her and what is the path ahead, also discussing the case of Senator De Lima, let me first say that we are in an interesting phase in Philippine politics. Because on the surface, the expectation was that sa ilalim ni Marcos Jr., there'll be more of a continuation of, if not intensification of, yung mga certain trend lines na nakita natin sa ilalim ng dating presidente natin, si Duterte. So we're talking about authoritarian populism, we're talking about weaponization of the law, among other very problematic trends na nakita natin sa ilalim ng dating administration. Now, let me be very clear about things. There's a huge difference between the rule of law, right, on one hand, and the rule by law or weaponized or weaponization of the law. Because, if you look at it historically, ito yung problema doon sa mga alam natin, mga katatay dyan. Ang argument nila, batas naman yan Yun pong sinabi ng batas. Kung itong sinabi ng batas, ito yung gano'n. Well, let's not forget, guys. Let's not forget that when you talk about a real democracy, you're also talking about the rule of law. And when you talk about rule of law, you're talking about more or less consistent, coherent, predictable application of law, the spirit and the letter of the law, base sa saligang batas ng isang bansa, to all officials of the country, including those at the highest positions. And when you talk about highest positions, mga kameta, we're not talking about the senator of the republic or CEO of some company. We're talking about including the president. So clearly, if you look at it, as far as the rule of law is concerned, that was not what we have had in recent history, especially under the previous president. I mean, clearly the previous president was operating well above everything else, in the Chinese political system, which is clearly not a democracy, no, the Communist Party of China literally, no, operates above the law, right? It like the Chinese constitution has no direct reference to the political party, the Chinese political party, in a sense that it can hold it to account. So effectively, it operates above the entire system, including the legal system in China. So you cannot go to China and then file a case against the Communist Party of China at the Chinese Supreme Court, right? So this is the reality we have in a place like China, which is clearly not a democratic system. Now, nonetheless, marami tayong mga gray zones. Mga bansa kung saan in name they're democratic, they have elections, regular elections, although marami mga nangyaring kababalakan sa mga elections nila, marami nangyaring mga kalokohan sa elections nila. But you see, this is what we're talking about, mga kameta. When you talk about democracy, it goes beyond just elections. And the problem we have is that our understanding of democracy is just elections. So kung may elections na tayo, democracy na tayo. But one thing we forget is that how the degree to which a country is democratic is also about the health of the judicial institutions. It's also about the rule of law. At yun yung nagiging problema natin, mga kameta. Kung titignan mo, under President Duterte, clearly we had what you call penal populism. A situation whereby the president essentially bent and twisted the law, the letter, the spirit of the law, or he was able to bend and twist, checks and balances, etc., to push ahead with his bara style of war on drugs. That was clearly what we had on the previous president. Now, in that situation, it's clearly not about rule of law. And the criticism against the previous president was that what we had was rule by law, whereby the law or certain adulterated interpretation of the law or certain weird interpretation of the law, right, was used in order to push for a specific political agenda, namely the consolidation of power under the previous president, and namely yung pressing to its logical conclusion, yung war on drugs ni Paolo Duterte. Sorry, nag-disconnect yung internet dito on the sites na distract ako dito. So yun yung context na meron tayo, mga kameta, over the past 6-7 years or so, which is we did not have more or less rule of law. We never really had rule of law, but it's a spectrum. No, are you like 6 out of 10 in terms of rule of law, 8 out of 10, 10 out of 10? Clearly, we were not even 5 or 6 out of 10. No, if you look at how things were operating, and the term also that men use is the weaponization of the law. No, so for instance, libel, right? Cyber libel. A big concern is that many authoritarian populists use libel cases or tax-related cases to intimidate the opposition. And in fact, the first person to use that was Vladimir Putin. Now, as far as the 21st century is concerned, he shut down the top independent media outlets in his country by not going and putting them in jail a la Marcus Martial Law back in the 1970s. No, by coming up with pseudo cases here and there, politically motivated cases, and then of course with politicization of the judiciary, he was able to manipulate the system and ensure that he can use, in the name of law, he can use law in order to shut down your opposition and crack down on them. So this is what you call rule by law. So the proposition is very important. Rule of law is a situation whereby even the president is held to account. No, kung may mali siyang ginagawa, he's held to account, and there are institutional checks and balances. Sinisigurado mo na walang abuso ng power. A rule by law situation is what you have in both authoritarian system and semi-democratic system. This is the situation that we have had in places like Turkey, like Hungary, like India, like Brazil, like Indonesia, and some would argue also in the case of the Philippines. Now, with President Marcos Jr. coming in, the concern was, will we see the further intensification of this supposed rule by law or weaponization of the law situation? And this is where I kind of diverge with a number of colleagues and peers who were in this panic mode and said, when with Marcos Jr. everything is going to go crazy and supposedly we're going to have another martial law. And I said, no, I'm not very sure about that. Because if you look at Marcos Jr., he seems to have very different ideas, not only vis-a-vis his father, but also vis-a-vis tatay. Diba? And clearly, when it comes to Marcos Jr., he's very, very interested in, as he put it, to reintroduce the country. Nasaan siya ngayon? Hindi siya nandito yata, di ba? Nasa Davos pa rin. Consistently is going abroad. Consistently is trying to rebrand the Philippines. Consistently is trying to fully rehabilitate, of course, the Marcoses in the international community, no? And of course, to pave the way for the next generation to have a much easier political situation than what they have had throughout the past decades or so. So, That's why I was cautiously optimistic that we might see a whiff of change, or hopefully more than just a whiff of change, under the current administrations. Not necessarily expecting that the current administration will necessarily be, let's say, progressive, democratic, I mean, liberal democratic. Not necessarily that, but also, but at least in terms of correction of some of the excesses of the previous administration on a number of issues. We clearly see that correction happening when it comes to our relations with our Western partners, sa relasyon natin sa China, nakikita natin, and with Russia, there's further correction of that. Doon sa war on drugs, at least we have seen many good indications that hindi, at least itong kasalukuyan administration, ayaw nila yung bara-bara style, at they're much more concerned about mitigating extrajudicial killings and other abuses of power in the conduct of counter-narcotics operations, among others. So we clearly see a whiff of change, if not a little bit more than a whiff of change. And then, nakita din natin earlier this month that there was this very important ruling by the Supreme Court, kung saan the Joint Maritime Seismic Undertaking, diniscuss natin yan mga kameta, look at our vlogs a few days back. The JMSU, the Joint Maritime Seismic Undertaking, signed between Arroyo administration and China and Vietnam, but particularly vis-a-vis China, that was struck down as unconstitutional after more than 10 years of lingering there in the courts. So, for me, the timing was very important because this came very close to yung pagbisita ni Pangulong Marcos to China. It is also very important because it sets a very important precedence that makes it very difficult for the next presidents, or any president for that matter, to violate the Constitution in the name of building better relationship with China, or to compromise yung ating mga interest dyan sa West Philippine Sea in the name of building a better relationship with China. So that precedence was very important. And for me, it also showed that the Supreme Court can and should, of course, exercise this kind of guardrail role as far as our democracy is concerned, as far as our national interest is concerned. Because, let's be honest, there have been a lot of criticism against our judiciary and our Supreme Court throughout the years. I'm not going to essentially adjudicate those judgments or criticisms. Mahabang usapan yan. But the reality is that there have been certain concerns about how independent, how effective the judiciary has been in terms of checking the excesses of the other branches of the state, especially the presidential office, especially the executive. So that was a very important one. And then now you have this acquittal of Maria Ressa. But let's be very clear, mga kameta. We're only talking about, it's important, it's a big and important case, but we're talking about 1 out of 4 major cases, as far as Maria Ressa is concerned. So there are 3 other actually pending cases here, mga kameta, that we have to keep in mind. So, right, okay. So, let me just get down to this because, yes, I mean, of course, we are, many people are celebrating what's happening, but it's important that we put things into context, no? So, ang pinag-usapan natin dito yung tax evasion case laban sa kanya and how that was struck down. And since this is a criminal case filed against her, the charges were criminal, the threshold was really high for the prosecutor side, for the other side, no? To prove, beyond reasonable doubt that talagang there was an intentional purpose of violating our tax laws, etc. So they were not able to establish that, and therefore dun sa appeals court it was struck down. I'm just trying to get the exact wording here para. Okay, so Maria Ressa, of course, was very happy. She said today, facts win, truth wins, justice wins. She's very good in terms of coming out with those kinds of tagline, headline, etc. Now, so the Philippines Court of Tax Appeals, ayon sa kanila, yung mga prosecutors failed to provide or prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt when it comes to tax evasion cases that was filed against her, nonetheless, so we're looking at one important case, I'll post more about the details of that later on. So this is in relation to Rappler raising capital through some international partnerships and foreign investors. So ang kaso sa kanila was that there was certain income earned from those capital raised with foreign investors, and those incomes were taxable, and the tax should have been paid, and supposedly the tax was not paid. Therefore, this case was filed against her, to just make the case simple. So the foreign investors, Omidyar Network and North Base Media, had generated taxable income worth of £2.1 million or $2.6 million. Ayon dun sa isang site, ito yung Justice Department under the previous administration, and sabi nila hindi daw na-declare at hindi daw na ano. So that was the circumstances of the case. But the court found that hindi na i-prove beyond reasonable doubt that there was any intention to avoid taxes, etc. So it was struck down. And in fairness to the Justice Secretary, the Department of Justice under the current administration at least, they said they're going to respect this. Now, this was of course welcome by many quarters. I'm not sure about the Tatay quarter, but the Philippine National Union of Journalists said the tax evasion case reflects an increasing use of law for reprisal and intimidation against journalists and civil society. Ito yung weaponization na sinasabi ko, weaponization of the law. So ayon sa kanya, while colleagues similarly face legal challenges from libel to made-up terrorism charges in relation to their work, we take inspiration from this acquittal that if we stand up and hold the line, we can win. So clearly the hold the line, Maria Ressa kind of tagline, this is the thing that is inspiring a lot of people. We also saw very strong statements coming from different human rights related groups, Carlos Conde among others. But this is what we have to keep in mind, mga kameta, no? There are still other cases. Ito yung Rappler's appeal against the 2022 closure order laban sa Rappler. Hindi pa rin na-resolve yan. Meron din appeal by Ms. Ressa and former rapper journalist Reynaldo Santos dun sa cyber libel. Yan, malaki yan. I think 6 years pa yan, if ever. So that's also a big case. If I'm not mistaken, this is with the Supreme Court. And there's also another tax evasion case or tax-related case filed also against Maria Ressa and Rapper. So there are a number of other cases still there. So hindi po tapos ang laban as far as freedom of expression, press freedom, and as far as, of course, Maria Ressa and her fate is concerned. Not to mention, of course, yung mga mas hindi ganong kakilala, no, journalists, including a former researcher and journalist with Rappler na si Reynaldo Santos Jr., who's also facing cyber libel cases. So these are serious cases, and let's see what the Supreme Court and other appeal courts are doing, or other courts are doing vis-a-vis these cases. So hindi pa tapos, no? Hindi pa tapos. Let's still see where this is going. Pero para sa akin, of course, there's a reason to hope that perhaps we'll see kind of a positive development also dun sa kaso laban kay Senator De Lima. Because I'll be very honest about this. As far as Senator De Lima is concerned, I think of all opposition or independent-minded figures in this country, I think she has suffered the most. Or she I mean, come on, you're talking about years. How many years? 4 or 5 years na, di ba? And walang ebidensya. I mean, there's no real evidence whatsoever to talk about real evidence whatsoever. Yung mga witnesses nag-withdraw na, especially as soon as nawala na yung dating administration si Tatay. So, for me, I mean, she should have been nominated for Nobel Peace Prize too, at least, di ba? And I think she has a very good reason. She deserves to win that, precisely because of the degree of difficulty she has faced and the degree of, I don't know, man. I mean, pinag-usapan natin in the vlog last year, diba? Medyo na-emotional pa tayo sa vlog na yan. But that's my, like, 4 or 5 years behind bars on really barely any real evidence. And with witnesses still withdrawing and still she being there, I mean, what's going on here, diba? So ang hope ng iba dyan is at least we'll see finally some development on this front, good developments on this front, and hopefully there'll be also some sort of, at least for her supporters, some sort of acquittal on her front. Unless there's some really incontrovertible evidence that was not found all of these years, some real credible witness that was not found all these years, and then suddenly nag-pop up ngayon, then ibang usapan na yan, di ba? But that's not what we see, right? So we hope that there will also be some movement on that front, and our best wishes to our folks in the judiciary, among others, as they, execute their mandate as the guardrails of our democracy. Alright? Maraming salamat. Thank you very much, mga kameta. I know may mga iba kayong papanoorin ngayon. So, magte-thank you lang tayo dito. Sabi ko, ihabol ko to before the end of the night. So, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, mga kameta. Masan na? Oh, and by the way, huwag niyo kalimutan, mag-subscribe pa rin kayo dun sa podcast natin, mga kameta. Trying to just find here. At ang hina ng internet dito. Ayan. Ano ba nangyari sa internet ko? Ba't di ko makikita? Second, So, I'm just saying, like, there are reasons to be hopeful, but marami pang pwede mangyari. Alright? So, we're following this just closely, step by step. At katulad ng sinabi ko, as much as you have to be prepared for contingencies and difficulties and all, also be prepared for some potentially good surprises. So again, as always, thank you so much kay Mama Edna Nolona and Jocelyn Lumberio. Super thank you kay Risa Ani, Mish Tencho, all the people who continue to support us. We really appreciate it. Of course, it's a bit of a sensitive issue. There's still court cases, there are ongoing court cases. We don't want to prejudge these cases, but I mean, you don't have to be a constitutional lawyer or a prosecutor to know when acquittal should come sooner than later. Hopefully, right? At least. As I said, unless there are certain things that we don't know as far as evidence, credible evidence, incontrovertible evidence is concerned. Let's not forget, in a democracy, we're talking about, you're innocent until proven guilty. And in terms of proof, the threshold should be very high, especially in criminal charges. You're talking about beyond reasonable doubt. All right? Maraming salamat, guys. Thank you very much and talk to you soon.